In this video, I'm gonna talk about the top 5 lures to use in the month of May. To me, May is one of the best times of the year to go out fishing. You have fish in a lot of different phases. They can be caught on a number of different lures, but I do have 5 that I will not go to the lake without. And in this video, we're gonna talk about them. This video is brought to you by Omnia Tackle. Guys, Omnia is more than just a tackle shop. It is a complete resource for bass fishermen. Not only do I get all of my tackle there, but I love to look at the things on Omnia like fishing reports. You can find fishing reports on the lakes that you fish. Not only that, they also show you some of the lures that are producing right now. Omnia also has their Pro app that allows you to put a lot of different overlays onto high quality topographical maps. There's really not a day that goes by fishing anymore that Omnia isn't somehow a part of it. So I'm gonna leave a link down below for the app. I'm gonna leave a link down below for the lures that I'm gonna talk about. It is the best way to help support this channel by clicking down there, shopping at Omnia, and also checking out their app. Now, real quick, before we get into the lures, I think it's really important to understand kind of what is happening in the month of May. So I'm gonna give you a short overview. Now, the further south that you live, the more that the fish are going to be done spawning and kind of more in the post-spawn kind of phase of the year. You have a lot of fish that are still kind of up shallow throughout the country, whether you're in the northern part of the country or in the south, definitely in the middle part. And you also, up north, you're gonna have some pre-spawn fish. So you really have fish that are kind of in a number of different phases. But these lures, I'm gonna talk about them. I'm gonna show you exactly where I like to use them, what situation I like to use them in, and how it might apply to the bodies of water that you fish. Now, lure number 1 is a topwater. Now, there are a number of different topwaters that I like to throw in the month of May. Now, one of my absolute favorites is a good old Strike King Sexy Dog. This particular bait is a walking style bait. To me, it gets some really big bites in the month of May. And I use this thing everywhere. I will throw it really shallow right up on the bank. I also like to use it on these large kind of flatter points that extend out. You see this a lot you see this all over the country, but sometimes you'll have these rock points or grass points where a lot of these kind of post-spawn fish are gonna move out to these points to start feeding up. And one of the best ways to kind of cover a lot of water is throwing a topwater bait. Not only that, you're gonna have some explosive results. You're gonna have a lot of fish coming up there, blowing up, and it just seems like there are days where you will catch some of the biggest bass on the lake or the pond or the river that you're fishing only with a topwater. It's like they won't eat anything else. So I always have a topwater rigged up this time of the year. Now, a couple of things that you really want to look for that can really elevate a topwater bite this time of the year is a shad spawn or a bluegill spawn. You start to see this happening a lot during the month of May, where you will have bass that are now feeding on shad and bluegill that are spawning. Now, when it comes to a bluegill spawn, this is pretty simple. You're gonna be able to visibly see this with your own eyes. A lot of times bluegills are colonial spawners. They're not solitary spawners. So they will spawn in groups. So sometimes this group may be 10 foot wide with 10 or 15 beds. Sometimes they'll be 100 feet wide with hundreds of beds. But the big thing here is that bass like to kind of linger around the outside edge of the bluegill beds, and then they will go up there and kind of eat those fish. One of my first things that I like to throw is some sort of topwater bait. Now, a walking style bait like this is great. Sometimes I'm going to use more of a bluegill style color. Another great one is some sort of popper style bait, some sort of popper. I like to throw that on the outside of those beds. Now, if you're looking for a shad spawn, if you have threadfin gizzard shad in the lake, this is also something you can visibly see with your eyes. You're gonna see a lot of fish that are actually spawning up on like riprap rock type banks. You will also see them spawning around shallow grass and vegetation. And one of the most popular areas is on the underside of floating docks. That is where shad like to spawn. Now, the big thing with the shad spawn, timing is everything. The bluegill spawn happens for a number of days, all day long. The shad spawn only happens in kind of that first hour or two when it gets light in the morning, and that first hour or two when it gets dark in the morning. Now this can be prolonged by, you know, dirtier water or cloud cover, but for the most part, you really need to get up early or stay out late if you want to take advantage of the shad spawn. And the great thing is you will visibly see this. You will see shad scurrying along rocks, scurrying around the underside of docks, and you can absolutely target them with a bait like this sexy dog and catch a lot of them. Now, lure number 2 is one of my absolute all-time favorites, and that is a floating worm. If you guys have been around the channel, you know how much I love this bait. Now, there are 2 colors that I typically throw with a floating worm. It's going to be a bubblegum or it's going to be a methylate. And I like the Zoom, the good old standard Zoom trick worm. I throw it on a spinning rod and reel, but you could throw it on a bait caster if you want. I usually do 10-pound braid to a 12-pound fluorocarbon leader. I don't always think that the leader is necessary in this case because this thing is so bright that I think the fish are just highly attracted to it. But I do tend to throw a leader kind of because I like the way that it casts. Guys, this is a deadly technique. It's an old school technique. It's one that guys don't tend to fish as much, but man, it is so powerful. It is so effective. And this is a shallow water technique. This is really, I'm going to throw this a lot in shallow water. And the thing that I am really trying to do in this situation is catch a lot of fry garters and fish that are actually really close and around their beds. So if you have a lot of fish in shallow water, man, a floating worm is very hard to not throw. And again, it's very exciting. Now, the way that you work this bait, if you don't know, you're gonna cast this bait out, you're gonna let it hit the water. I let it sit and I let it sink down for maybe about a foot, maybe a couple of seconds, let it sink down about a foot, and then I'm gonna pop it 2, 3, 4 times just below the surface of the water, and then again, let it float down. And I'm only letting it get about a foot below the surface of the water. I will let it go a little bit deeper if I'm fishing really clear water. But man, this is such a fun bite because it's like the topwater. You see every single fish come up there and hit that thing, and it is an absolute blast. Now, one thing that I've learned about the floating worm that I think is really, really important is that make sure you wait a second or two before you set the hook with that worm. And the reason being is that when you have a topwater bite, pretty much that fish is hitting that bait, it's getting the treble hooks instantly. You can set the hook fairly quickly. But with the floating worm, I've seen a number of times where those fish will come up there and they will actually just hit the tail. You will see them like they'll hit it and they'll swim away and they only have that tail. And it just takes them another second or two to kind of suck it up. Now sometimes they will just smash it. It absolutely disappears and you don't see it. Obviously at that point in time, set the hook. But sometimes you will see these fish that'll just kind of hit the tail and they scurry off really quickly and you will see the glow of that worm. And so a lot of times I'm going to wait just a second or two before I set the hook on them. Sometimes it's really, really hard to do because it's such a visual way of catching a fish. But man, this is really, really fun. Now, when it comes to throwing bubblegum or methylate, I kind of do what Jeff Crete really taught me with this technique. And when I fish in kind of clear or a little bit stained water, I like the bubblegum. When I'm fishing watercolor that is a lot less visible, not like super muddy, because this technique doesn't work in really muddy water, but like stained water, you know, a couple of feet of visibility, I like to use that methylate. And the reason being, methylate just glows in the water. It really, really glows in the water. And so I think because of the dirtier water and that glowing kind of action, I guess you could say, that bait has, it really helps you to get just a few more bites. Now, the next bait that I like is actually what I use a lot to bed fish with. I know that a lot of you guys don't bed fish, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this, but if I am seeing bass that are on beds and I wanna catch them, to me, this is one of the best, if not the best baits to fish. I've been throwing this bait a lot this spring, but I've been fishing this particular bait a lot on beds over the years. And this is actually an X-Zone muscleback finesse crawl. And the reason that I like this particular crawl is the plastic actually floats a little bit. I have always liked to throw a crawl style bait on beds, especially smaller ones. I used to throw a speed crawl, a Zoom speed crawl a lot. That's a great bait for beds as well. But this particular bait, the plastic floats a little bit, and so it just kind of keeps that bait up. And when you are looking at a fish on a bed and you're trying to get that fish to react, or you're trying to find the sweet spot on a bed, having that bait that's kind of up in that fish's grill and also kind of moving a lot more because of its floating nature, it just seems to trigger more fish. I mean, there have been times where I am like 30, 40 feet away from a bed and I just make a random pitch to it and I pick up and a fish has already got this thing and he's moving off the bed before I even see anything, before I even see the fish. This is a really good little bait. Now, I like to fish a 3/8 ounce weight a lot of times with a 4/0 trocar flipping hook. To me, that is a great bait to fish. This is also just a great bait to flip. If you like to flip and pitch, you know, this is a great bait to do that. Now, lure number 4 is a glide bait. Now, I actually talked about fishing a glide bait in the month of April, but I like a glide bait for a little bit different reasons in the month of May. I'm gonna talk about that right now. Now, to me, there's a number of different glide baits on the market. You have a lot of really expensive glide baits, $200, $250, $300 glide baits. This $60 glide bait, I know $60 is a lot for a lure, and you guys told me that in the last video, but it's one of the cheaper options for a really high quality glide bait. That's the Spro KGB Glide. This thing is bad to the bone. It's got rotating hook hangers on it. It looks just like a shad. It's a great bait if you're fishing around a shad spawn like we talked about earlier, but I really like this bait for a couple of other reasons that I'm gonna talk about. Now, if you want an even cheaper option, you can go with the Storm Arashi Glide. I think that's a $30 a glide bait. That's on the very cheap end of glide baits that I have seen that actually catches bass. I've actually used that Arashi Glide quite a bit, caught a lot of fish on it too. So guys, the big thing with glide baits is that there's still a lot of guys that are, you know, just not familiar with glide baits, and I'm even one of them. Like this is a technique that I've really kind of invested a lot more time in over the last probably 3 years because I just want to learn it. And it seems like every time I go out and fish a glide bait, I learn something new. Now with the glide bait during the month of May, there's a couple of things that I am trying to do with the glide bait, and it's not always catching a fish. I think that that's really important to understand. This is a great fish finding tool. That's actually why it stays on the front deck of my boat all times of the year. But during the month of May, when you have a lot of fish that are shallow and maybe even on beds, you can throw this thing over their beds and you're gonna be able to draw those fish off the bed because it's such a big presence, and you can actually locate fish that are on beds really quickly with this bait. Now, on the flip side of things, if you have fish that are kind of more in the post spawn, they kind of started to move off the beds, kind of in some of those same areas that we talked about with the topwater bait, this is also a great way to locate schools of fish. And sometimes you may not catch a lot of fish, but the ones that you will catch will typically be those really big post spawn females that are looking for a big bite. They're looking for a big bait to get full. And so the thing with this bait, I like to throw it out kind of everywhere. I'll throw it next to a dock. I will throw it on a grass flat, on a grass point like we talked about earlier. And sometimes you may not catch fish, but you will have followers. And this is really, really important. A lot of people talk about followers being a big disappointment with glide bait fishing. I get excited for it because the thing that followers do is they allow me to see if there are fish in an area. And that's really, really important because sometimes you just have to get the timing right. If you're fishing in that post-spawn time of the year, sometimes timing can be absolutely everything. You can fish the same spot 3 or 4 times, but there's just a certain time where the bass are going to feed. Like if you're throwing that topwater and you don't get bit over that point, I might go back with a glide bait just to see if there are fish in that area. If I start drawing out a lot of fish on the glide bait, as in a lot of followers, I know that I might be able to come back and hit those places later in the day, either with the glide bait or with that topwater again, and actually catch those fish. Because again, you have to get your timing right. So to me, a glide bait, it really stays on my front deck of the boat all the time now, but it's a great tool during the post spawn to find fish, and you will catch some big fish. Make no mistake about it. You can go out there, you can do the bend millican if you want, throw this thing over a brush pile, throw this over deep grass, catch fish, you know, utilizing your forward-facing sonar. Now, to me, I've saved kind of my favorite technique. Well, gosh, I love all these techniques, but I saved one of my favorites for last, and that is a deep diving crankbait. To me, in the month of May, especially in the later part of May, when those fish are just getting out to deeper water structure, a deep diving crankbait is one of the best ways to catch them. And you can catch a lot of big ones during this time of the year. To me, late May, early June, this is when I throw a deep diving crankbait a lot. Now, the most important thing about deep diving crankbaits is making sure you figure out whether fish like ones with rattles or ones without rattles. Now, I talk a lot about a deep diving crankbait and also how to find offshore bass in this video right here. So if you guys want to learn more about the deep diving crankbait and fishing offshore, click on this video right here, and I will see you guys in the next one.